The city was alive with its usual symphony of noise-honking cars, chattering crowds, and the distant rumble of construction. Among the tide of people rushing along the sidewalks, a small figure moved with quiet caution, almost blending into the gray pavement. He was a child, no older than 8 or 9, dressed in clothes that had clearly seen better days. The fabric was faded and patched in several places, and the shoes, though neatly tied, were scuffed and worn thin at the soles. In their tiny hands, the child clutched a backpack that was far too big for their frame, the straps digging slightly into their shoulders as they navigated through the bustling streets. The child's mother was a janitor at one of the tallest buildings in the city, and her work demanded every ounce of her energy. Early mornings and late nights left her exhausted, and most days she could barely find the time to see her child. Despite this, she loved the child fiercely, and it was this love that had instilled a cautious resilience in them. The child had learned to be self-reliant, to observe the world silently, and to navigate it without drawing attention. They never approached strangers, never asked for help, and never sought friendship among the busy commuters who seemed to have no time for someone like them. As the child walked, their eyes flicked nervously from one adult to another. They noticed briefcases clutched tightly, handbags swinging with purpose, and cell phones held close as conversations raced by. Faces blurred past them, strangers whose lives seemed distant and untouchable, like characters from a story the child was not allowed to read. They wanted nothing more than to be noticed, yet every instinct told them to stay invisible, to move carefully along the edges of the crowd, avoiding unwanted attention. The air carried the smell of street food, gasoline, and the faint, sweet scent of flowers from a nearby vendor. The child paused briefly to watch a group of pigeons pecking at crumbs near a bench. They crouched slightly, careful not to startle the birds, and for a moment, there was a fragile peace. But the noise of the city quickly pulled them back into its current, the constant push and pull of human activity reminding them of their smallness. Despite the isolation, there was a spark in the child's eyes, a quiet hope, a longing for connection that had not yet been fulfilled. Their small fingers gripped the straps of the backpack tightly, and they took careful steps forward, moving with a mix of caution and determination. Every now and then, the child glanced up at the towering skyscrapers, imagining a world inside them so different from their own. It was a world of people who laughed freely, of warmth and comfort, of lives that seemed untouched by hardship. And yet, even amid the endless movement, the child remained alone, a solitary figure in a city of countless strangers. Their gaze lingered on faces that would never notice them, on hands that would never reach out, on voices that would never call their name. Yet, beneath the shyness and the fear, there was a fragile thread of courage that carried them forward, one careful step at a time, as if the city itself was waiting for a moment when that thread might be recognized and returned. The afternoon sun hung high over the city park, casting long, warm rays that filtered through the branches of old oak trees. Children laughed and ran across the grassy fields, their voices mixing with the chirping of birds and the distant hum of traffic. The air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass and the lingering sweetness of blooming flowers from a nearby garden. On a quiet bench, shaded by the branches, sat the child. Their legs swung slightly above the ground, too small to reach it comfortably, and their eyes followed the bustling crowd with a mixture of curiosity and caution. People passed by in elegant attire, women in flowing dresses, men in crisp suits, carrying leather briefcases. Couples strolled hand in hand, friends laughed over shared jokes, and joggers moved briskly along the winding paths. The child watched silently, taking in every detail without stepping into the flow of activity. Despite the joyful sounds around them, a faint shadow of loneliness lingered, a reminder that the world outside their mother's humble home often felt distant and untouchable. From across the park, a tall man in a sharply tailored suit noticed the child. His shoes were polished to a reflective shine, and the gold watch on his wrist gleamed in the sunlight. He carried a briefcase, but for the moment, he seemed distracted, almost drawn to the small figure sitting alone on the bench. He had spent years moving through high-powered meetings, corporate negotiations, and social gatherings, always in motion and always measured. But today, something about the child's quiet presence and unguarded gaze struck him differently. Unlike the hurried adults rushing past, the child was still, watching the world as if searching for something or someone they could trust. The millionaire hesitated, unsure why he was compelled to linger. He glanced around the park, expecting perhaps another adult to be nearby, a guardian or a companion, but no one appeared. The child's small frame seemed to absorb the sunlight, and their eyes, though cautious, held an unspoken invitation. It was a rare sight for him, a moment, untouched by pretense or calculation. Slowly, he moved closer, taking careful steps along the winding path that led to the bench. The child noticed him approaching but did not flinch. Instead, their gaze met his, and in that brief instant, a silent understanding passed between them. The world around them, the laughter, the chatter, the passing strangers seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them connected in a shared, unspoken acknowledgement. The child's hands fidgeted with the straps of the backpack, but there was no fear in their expression, only a mixture of hope and quiet curiosity. The millionaire, a man accustomed to commanding rooms and controlling outcomes, felt an unfamiliar vulnerability stirring within him. He had never experienced such a pure, uncalculated display of openness, and it left him momentarily speechless. He wondered, fleetingly, if this small figure could teach him more about humanity than any business deal or social gathering ever had. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The sounds of the park, the distant laughter, the hum of traffic, the chirping of birds continued around them. But in their shared gaze, the world seemed to slow. In that silent, suspended moment, the seed of a connection was planted. Fragile yet undeniable, waiting for the next movement that would transform it into something extraordinary. The child's small feet moved, almost on instinct, carrying them toward the man in the expensive suit. Every step was deliberate, yet filled with a tentative bravery that surprised even the child. People on the path glanced curiously at the approaching figure, some pausing mid-conversation to watch the unusual scene unfold. A child who never approached anyone, who had spent years shrinking away from strangers, who was now walking boldly toward a millionaire whose life seemed worlds apart from theirs. The millionaire noticed each step, his heart quickening in a way that startled him. He had faced countless boardrooms, negotiated deals worth millions, and navigated high-stakes situations with calm precision. Yet this simple act of a child moving toward him made him feel exposed, unprepared. The child's eyes, wide and earnest, never wavered as they closed the distance between them. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only an unspoken need to connect, to be seen, to be embraced. As the child reached him, time seemed to stretch. The busy park, the chatter of people, and the distant sounds of the city faded into the background. Without a word, the child lifted their small arms and wrapped them tightly around the millionaire's waist. The hug was firm, urgent, and filled with a raw, unfiltered emotion that caught the man completely off guard. His briefcase slipped slightly from his grip, but he hardly noticed. His attention was entirely consumed by the unexpected warmth enveloping him. For a brief moment, the millionaire froze, unsure how to respond. His mind, trained to analyze every situation and maintain control, raced for a solution, but no solution was needed. The child clung to him, their tiny body pressed close, their cheek resting against the fine fabric of his suit. It was a hug that conveyed 1,000 unspoken words: loneliness, hope, trust, and a desperate desire for safety. Slowly, he bent down slightly, wrapping his arms around the child in return. The action felt instinctive, almost necessary, as if he were acknowledging the unspoken plea in the child's embrace. People around them whispered quietly. Some moved along, others stopped, unsure if they were witnessing a moment of pure human connection or simply a strange park encounter. But to the two figures at the center, the world had narrowed to the space between their bodies. The child's heartbeat thumped rapidly against the millionaire's chest, and he could feel the steady rhythm of their small, trusting pulse. A lump rose in his throat as memory as long buried of his own childhood, of times when he had felt unseen surfaced unexpectedly. In that hug, he sensed not just the child's vulnerability, but their courage. It was a trust he had never been given, yet here it was, offered freely, without expectation or demand. Minutes seemed to pass, though perhaps it was only a moment. When the embrace finally loosened, the child looked up at him with wide, searching eyes, as if asking silently, "Are you real? Can I trust you?" The millionaire knelt slightly to meet their gaze, a gentle smile breaking across his face, and nodded. In that instant, an unspoken promise formed between them, a connection that would shape both of their lives in ways neither could have predicted. All beginning with the simple act of a child reaching out and hugging a stranger. The hug lingered longer than either of them expected. The child pressed close, their small hands gripping the edges of the millionaire's suit jacket with a strength that belied their slight frame. Around him, the park continued its steady rhythm. Joggers passed. Children laughed. Birds flitted through the branches, but, in that small circle, Time seemed to have slowed to a gentle, suspended heartbeat. The millionaire could feel the warmth radiating from the child, a warmth that was not merely physical but filled with unspoken emotion, raw and unguarded. He had lived a life of structure, precision, and careful calculation. Every action, every word, every deal had been measured and deliberate. But here, in the embrace of a small, trusting child, he encountered a truth he had long neglected. Life was not only about control or wealth, but about connection, about moments of pure, shared humanity. The child's trust was unspoken yet absolute, and it penetrated the layers of armor he had built around himself over decades. The child whispered something almost imperceptible, their voice a tiny thread of sound that seemed too fragile for the weight it carried. Though the words were lost to him, their meaning was unmistakable. There was a plea in their tone, a desire for recognition and acceptance, a hope that someone would see them as more than invisible. The millionaire's chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt a vulnerability that had nothing to do with finances, status, or power. It was a vulnerability born of empathy, of witnessing another soul reach out in need and trust. As the child clung to him, he noticed details he had overlooked in his life of privilege: the worn straps of the backpack, the faded shoes, the tired but hopeful eyes. Every small sign told a story of hardship, resilience, and quiet strength. In that instant she realized that wealth could never replace the simple, profound value of human connection. The child's embrace was not about money, status, or possessions. It was about being seen, being acknowledged, being held. The child finally pulled back slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet his fully. There was a depth in those eyes that spoke of experience far beyond their years, of moments of loneliness and yearning for care, of courage that had kept them moving forward despite a harsh world. The millionaire reached out, gently resting his hands on the child's shoulders, grounding them both. A silent understanding passed between them, one that did not require words. The child's trust had been given freely, and he accepted it, feeling a responsibility that was as new as it was profound. For several minutes, they simply stood there, two strangers connected by a single, transformative act. The world around them continued unabated, but neither noticed. In that quiet pocket of time, barriers of wealth and poverty, fear and loneliness, dissolved. It was a moment of clarity, of recognition, of shared humanity. The millionaire felt a shift within himself, resolved to protect, to care, to be present, in a way he had never been before. And for the child, the hug had opened a door to trust, a small but significant step toward hope. Together, they stood, suspended between past struggles and an uncharted future. The embrace marking the beginning of a bond neither could yet fully understand, but both would carry forever. From that day on, the park no longer felt like just another stretch of greenery in the middle of the bustling city. It became a place of anticipation, a quiet stage for a bond that was slowly taking shape. The millionaire made it a point to return, sometimes pausing in his busy schedule just to sit on the same bench and watch the child play, to see the flicker of curiosity and hope in their eyes. Each visit was met with the same mixture of caution and trust, a delicate balance that the child was learning to navigate. With every shared glance, every small smile, their connection deepened, becoming a quiet rhythm in both of their lives. The child's mother, initially wary of the attention from a stranger of such wealth, soon realized that his presence was gentle and unobtrusive. He never imposed, never offered charity with an expectation of gratitude, but instead simply acknowledged them as human beings deserving of care and respect. Slowly, he extended gestures of kindness, helping with school supplies, quietly arranging tutoring sessions, and offering small but meaningful support to ease the mother's burden at work. These acts were not grand spectacles, but they carried a weight far greater than any material gift. They carried dignity, understanding, and empathy. The child, who had once moved through life shrinking from the world, began to change. They started to speak more freely, their laughter emerging cautiously but more frequently, their eyes losing some of the shadow of distrust that had long lingered there. They learned that not every adult was distant or indifferent, that kindness could exist without condition, and that trust, once given, could be honored. The millionaire watched these transformations with a quiet amazement, recognizing that the smallest gestures often had the most profound effects. As weeks turned into months, their interactions became more than just casual meetings in the park. The millionaire found ways to integrate himself into their lives without overstepping, inviting the child to cultural events, museum visits, and quiet afternoons of reading. The child, in turn, began to share bits of their world, the small joys, The challenges of school, the routines of home. Each exchange was a building block, constructing a bridge of understanding between two very different worlds. Every hug, every moment of contact, became a reaffirmation of the bond they had formed. The child, once hesitant and wary, now ran toward him with a mixture of joy and certainty, their arms wrapping around him in the same way that had first connected them. The millionaire, whose life had often revolved around transactions and achievements, found that these simple, honest connections were richer than any business success he had ever known. In those embraces, he felt purpose, fulfillment, and a profound sense of humanity restored. Ultimately, the child's courage to reach out and the millionaire's willingness to respond with openness transformed them both. The child learned to trust, to hope, and to believe that the world could hold kindness as well as hardship. The millionaire learned to care without expectation, to value the invisible struggles of others, and to recognize that wealth was not only measured in money, but in the depth of human connection. And every time they hugged, whether in the quiet park or in fleeting moments of everyday life, they were reminded that a single act of trust and warmth could ripple outward, changing lives in ways neither had imagined possible.